So, thanks for joining us for this session. My name is Dave Tyler. I'm a solutions specialist at Avid. I'm here with Beatie Wolfe, George Seara, and Laz Casanova, and we're here to talk about the creative process and how using Pro Tools feeds into that. So, to start off with, do you want to all tell us a little bit about yourselves? So, Beatie, maybe start with you, if you can tell us give us a bit of background on you.
Yeah, for sure. Wonderful to be joining you today. So I'm a musician, songwriter, in some sense pretty traditional, but then I also create new formats for albums in the digital age. So I did an exhibition of those at the V&A Museum fairly recently. So it's just sort of thinking about how you can get the best of the old, the best of the physical, and the best of the digital, and sort of bridge the two. So a lot of my work is essentially reimagining vinyl experiences, but for today.
Cool. George, how about you?
Hi, nice to be with you all. And I'm a mixer, recording engineer, and started out as a musician as well myself, as a guitar player. But these days, my work predominantly is mixing, and I still participate throughout the recording process on occasions where I'm asked to be involved.
Fantastic. Laz?
First, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. I'm a DJ and producer for about 16 years now, primarily in house music. I also ran the legendary Merc label that came out of Miami, which is about the same age I am. And from there, I also have my own label called Pet Food, which focuses on deep house music. And then I A&R and manage a label called Made in Miami for a friend of mine called Oscar G. And that's about it. My focus is always in electronic music. I did just come out with a album about a month ago that does kind of cross over into different genres, and that's just a fun experiment that I was doing along the way.
Good. So maybe if we go back to you, Beatie, let's kind of open things up a little bit. So I'll give you a nice sort of general question to start off with. But when you're just thinking about creativity and starting that creative process, so how does that look? How does that look like for you? What do you reach for when you're feeling creative and you want to kind of start making some music?
Yeah, so for me, I think musically, like if I'm writing a song or if I'm starting a recording in that kind of vein, it can be anything from a story, a poem, having the words sort of first, or some sort of idea that I have, like a motif or something on the guitar. I used to be much more, I guess, like I'd sort of finesse the composition before I'd go into the studio. But now that we're in lockdown and now that so many more of us are doing things from home, what I've really enjoyed is actually almost discovering the composition during recording. So things I would never have done, I'd never have written because I think, it's too low, or this probably won't go together with that, part. Being able just to record it in the process of writing and almost discovering that, actually that sounds really great. So I think that's been one of the biggest changes recently is just opening up the way I write and having it be something that's more organic and almost being able to get that instant feedback of hearing what works and then building it from there.
So the technology is really kind of feeding into the creative process at this point.
Yeah and no. I mean, because, my music is probably of, the people here, it's definitely on the more organic side. It's all acoustic guitar, electric guitar, piano, organ. That's pretty much it. So a lot of the time it's in the sense of, using a lot of the plugins or different kind of tools within Pro Tools. I tend to just concentrate on getting, the good, like decent recordings and sort of having actually very few elements in those processes. But I think the technology in the sense of being able to capture it in that way, definitely, right. That's played a huge part.
Yeah, absolutely. So Laz, on that sort of, I guess the the technology for the kind of music that you're producing, maybe you're sometimes a little more reliant on the technology. Just wondering how that sort of feeds again into that sort of creative process when you want to kind of start working on something.
I usually, the first thing I do is I launch Pro Tools, but inside of Pro Tools, I like to start usually on a drum beat. And over the years, I've gotten accustomed to kind of sketching out ideas on Machine, and I run Machine inside of Pro Tools. Once I get like a pretty good idea going, I have a couple of synthesizers that I run through Pro Tools as well. My primary one right now is a Novation Peak, and I got a couple of the Roland Boutique stuff, Digitac. I'll start layering a couple things over that Machine drum beat, and then using some stuff like the real-time properties, the quantize feature on the synths, just so I don't have to like go back and like redo things. And once I'm kind of happy with that idea, I start kind of moving things into audio. I like working, especially in Pro Tools. I like, as soon as I can, putting things into audio, and I just feel it's like an easier workflow. But for Machine, it's pretty easy because I just drag and drop, and it'll just automatically, throw it into some audio files there. And that for me is it's a thing that I know with Pro Tools is I'm very comfortable with mixing in Pro Tools, so I kind of like to mix while I'm creating. So by the time I get to the end result, there's not really much I got to do other than like maybe give a little bit of headroom, some stuff on the master.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to come back and talk a little bit about that sort of that mixing process and how that sort of ties in. But so George, from your point of view, so you're as a recording mixing engineer. So at what point do you kind of get involved in the creation of the song that you're working on?
You know what? Nowadays, I think with the technology that we have available, and Pro Tools specifically, we are no longer confined to being in a traditional recording studio per se to capture ideas and songs. And so, just thinking of a recent project, an album project that I just finished with Shawn Mendes, when just before the pandemic struck, we were in sort of a residential studio space that was upstate New York, and we all returned home. And from there, we were deciding what would be the best approach to try and pursue this album and get through it all. So using Pro Tools as our recording DAW, we were able to basically set up a remote recording space. And I think that when you think back to like the way traditional albums are made, where people would say write songs, then they would hire a producer, then they would get into pre-production and maybe some pre-rehearsals, and then book the studio and go in. It's not always conducive to capturing the best performances because you have a clock ticking. There's a lot of pressure to make it all happen at this given moment. So there was a lot of special benefits that were yielded by us being able to go into a somewhat non-traditional recording space and see what happens. And so, just to move along quickly, I'll just say that basically once we were set up, it would be recording, say, a talkback mic that would be in the room, while Shawn might have some ideas that he's already sort of relaying and sharing with his, producers or close-knit collaborators. And from there, not just a talkback mic, but sometimes another mic that I have in the room, because I'll have mics all around, I can quickly record little ideas and bits and pieces. And we often, even though it's an acoustic instrument that we're recording, whether it's a guitar or a piano or a drum beat, we're able to quickly put them onto a grid, loop them. So from there, we can build upon those ideas. And so Pro Tools really acts as, an enabler or allows us to capture all these things pretty freely and when we're most inspired, which is pretty amazing.
Cool, thank you. So Beatie, actually talking about environments, I'm just looking at this cool cool studio that you're in. So presumably that's is that an important thing for you to be sort of have that space where you're just kind of comfortable and nothing's getting in the way so that you can create?
Definitely. And I think what George was saying about being able to capture things in the moment and it not being on a clock and not having that pressure and not feeling like you have to sort of nail it. You have this time period that's sort of very rigid. And, one studio I was working in a lot in LA sort of previously was, Linda Perry, like we were doing a fair amount of stuff together. And that was definitely a place where you could you felt like you could receive, just the atmosphere and everything was set up so that it could be organically captured without it feeling like you were sort of, it was okay, go. And I think for me, that's really important because I think that, the best stuff comes kind of often when we're least expecting it. Whether that's even, when you're sleeping and you suddenly have a song in your head. So I think that being able to just have that access and empowerment, as an artist, I work with obviously different people and also not just producers, other music people, but engineers and, scientists and astrophysicists and all these kind of weird people. And right now I'm doing a collaboration with CERN and Mark Mothersbaugh to create a sort of sonic interpretation of some of the data that they're, collecting at the moment with some of the big experiments at CERN. So like my stuff is all out there a lot of the time, and it's nice to be able to actually do it, a large portion of it myself, and then obviously you can send it off for certain aspects. But and definitely with collaborative stuff, if Mark's able to send me stuff and, we're able to work on sort of on sessions together, but I can do that from here. I think that's a huge thing for artists these days is to take the power back, and not just be dependent on, and that's not just on a production side, but managerial, all sorts of things. Like, I think there's very much that mode that the artist is kind of told what to do. And I think, the more you can do yourself, the better.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Laz, I mean, I guess just coming around to you, so you've got your studios at your house, is that right?
Yeah. It's always been my house. Like I came from just basically a bedroom producer background and never kind of graduated from that. I do like the idea of having a separate workspace, and what I've done is over the years just kind of make sure I move into places that have a dedicated room that I could pretend like I'm clocking into work, and
Yeah.
from there it's for me it's always been obviously the workspace and being comfortable in it is a big part of it, but for me is the hours that I work. I like to work primarily like midnight to 6, 7 a.m. whenever I'm like in crunch zone. And for me, that is like the peace of mind that you're not going to have to answer any emails. No one's going to call you. There's no text messages. You're just in there focused, and you can just dedicate as much time as you want at the cost of a little bit of your sanity and sleep, but it all works out.
So George, I mean, obviously you're there in a studio. So is that your own studio space that you have?
It's not my own studio space. I like to think of it as my studio space because I spend quite a bit of time here. So a bunch of the equipment that's in this room is my own equipment that I just park here and leave here. But it's a studio called Noble Street Studios. It's downtown Toronto. Happens to be about a 15-minute bike ride from my home. So by sheer coincidence, I have that benefit of being very close to the studio that I love to work out of.
So I guess for all of you, it's that balance, isn't it, between, as you say, having immediate access when you want to be creative and so on, but also maybe not necessarily having that sort of on top of you the whole time. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, it would drive me insane if I just feel like I've done that before. I've in my early 20s, I was in a studio bedroom with everything there, my bed, just basically living in my work, and it just takes it takes so much discipline to be able to work in that, and also it takes a toll on you on your organization and everything, because then you start, it's hard for you to divide what's work time, what's personal time. You could easily just spend an hour playing PlayStation because it's like right across from wherever your studio set up. So that division is important. Obviously, being able to access. I know some people necessarily might have a separate workspace outside of their house, but they'd have a remote thing that they could set up with like a quick MIDI keyboard or something, at least to like sketch down ideas.
Yeah, I think for me, like work and life are completely intertwined. I think there are a lot of people, and I really understand it, I really respect it, that need that sort of different environment. And, then they come home and they sort of relax and have that headspace. And I think my work has always been my life and vice versa. And it's sort of not in a, not just in a way that's, whether it's weekends or night times or whatever, if there's a project I'm passionate about, which there usually is, there are no boundaries, and I will literally do whatever and put whatever into it, and not in like a pat myself on the back way, not that anyone needs to know that, but that's just what gives me so much joy, and it's sort of why I feel like I'm here, So I think for me, having that integration is really, it's not even important, it's just how I've always kind of lived.
Yeah. So there's this perception that, sort of Pro Tools is for audio, sort of editing and mixing, and obviously it's very good at that. But I think sometimes sort of people miss out on, what's possible with Pro Tools as a creative tool. So I just wondered maybe kind of any of you, if anyone's got any sort of thoughts on that, any sort of input as to how you kind of use Pro Tools creatively, and maybe even how you started using Pro Tools creatively.
I mean, I'll jump in quickly and say just it's probably the most obvious, or it may sound cliche to say it, but Pro Tools in its own, just thinking of it as a canvas, it allows you to do anything that you can imagine. So if you might first think, okay, well, you can record with it. But what else can you do with it? Well, you can mix with it. And everything that's related to those two things, Pro Tools has the ability to be a bit of like a sculpting tool. So think of it as, clay or Play-Doh, however you like to envision it, but it allows you to basically take, your ideas that are outside of, let's say, your workstation or your tape recorder, and capture them in such a way and continue to build upon them in such a way that is extremely inspiring. Like, oftentimes if I'm in a recording situation as an engineer, I sort of think of myself as being a bit of a chameleon, where I'm sort of the go-between between, let's say, an artist and, let's say, a producer or multiple producers. And sometimes the artist develops a certain comfort in having me there because maybe, I've developed a little bit of a synergy or awareness of what it is that they like, whether it's, a headphone mix or a certain, guitar sound or just things that they might like. And so Pro Tools allows us to quickly, and when I say quickly, I mean like real time quickly, record and build upon and inspire further recording, very, very quickly.
For me, Pro Tools, when I first started using it, I was coming off of using, I think, Reason in Ableton, and a buddy of mine, it was a really silly argument, but his whole thing was like, it has the word pro in it, so pros use it. Pro Tools, like, use it. And I was like, all right, make a valid argument, I guess. But in that time, I had met a couple friends that were all using Pro Tools, and for me, and I've gone and I've used Ableton. I know it has its strengths and weaknesses, like everything does. But the couple of things I've done in Ableton, I find myself on the mixing end of it, and post mastering, spending a lot more energy than I would if I was just kind of doing everything in Pro Tools to begin with, and kind of doing things at the same time. You know, and even though there was some sort of stigma with Pro Tools, I feel like there's been advancements. One of the new features that came out now with the MIDI to audio function. I have a couple of like remixes that are coming up that I can't wait to use that thing, because I feel like that is a great creative tool if you not just remixing, but just to get some if you're not classically trained and you just want to quickly get a melody out from audio to MIDI and be able to kind of match it. That's a very useful tool. But as far as the whole canvas of Pro Tools and just the workflow of it, it's just, for me, has been there's been improvements on it and over the years, but it's never made me feel alienated that I need to like relearn the whole thing when a new version comes out or whatever. It's always worked for me, and I'm all about welcoming improvements, and I know that there's always been improvements on it. And for me, it's at the end of the day, I create music, but I also have a big factor that I need it to sound good, because this music I'm going to be playing at a club system, and it needs to be a certain standard, and Pro Tools gets me there.
Fair enough. And how about you, Beatie? Someone who's coming at it from from being a sort of musician, maybe rather than having a studio background. So how was that? How did you sort of start getting involved with using Pro Tools for your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've used it for over a decade, with usually with other people, other producers, but that I was also sort of working alongside with. I think the word that sort of comes to mind is intuitive. It feels very intuitive, which is what I like about it. And from a perspective of using it for everything from, I have this radio show, I do Calm. I was the Calm sleep, the sleep app's first original content creator. So I created, long soundtracks and stories for people to go to sleep to, which is kind of counterintuitive in some ways, but, as a musician. And then obviously I mentioned the sun thing, this environmental protest project. I'm using it for all different sorts of things, outside of obviously, songwriting and music production. And I think for me, because, ironically, every one of these album designs that I've created has been a first of its kind, also due to the technology. So they've all been totally, cutting edge technology. But in some ways, people wouldn't necessarily know that, because it feels very nostalgic. It feels very familiar and very inclusive. And so ironically, I used technology to reintroduce a more traditional, old school experience, but in a way that feels new. So I think, technology always has to facilitate a greater vision, narrative, story, content. And for me, Pro Tools is just the sort of facilitator of a lot of content that I'm creating.
That's the end of the first part of the discussion, and we'll be continuing in the next video.